In this lecture, we'll be introducing async components. Vue.js allows us to define our components as a factory function, and that can asynchronously resolve our component definition. Vue.js will only trigger the factory function when the component actually needs to be rendered, and will cache the result for future re-renders. So here, if I have to create one component which is going to be asynchronous in nature, I'll be first of all making use of the Vue keyword, and then here I'll say component. Inside this, I'll be giving it a name. Let's call it as async comp. After that, I'll be providing a function which will accept two parameters, resolve and reject. And inside this, I'll be, let's call it a setTimeout function, which will actually mimic asynchronous feature. Inside this, I'll be calling this resolve, which will be executed after a set time period. So let's have our template defined here as this. And once that's done, let's close this div. So our template is defined, and we can even log a console message when this will come. So I'll say async, and this needs to be called, let's say, after 3 seconds. So we have defined our component, and here you'll notice that the factory function receives a resolve callback, and this should only be called when we have received or retrieved our component definition from the server. We can even call reject to indicate that the load has failed, but here we are mimicking setTimeout, and we are making use of the resolve method to display our template. So this is the template that will be rendered once the timeout of 3 seconds elapses. Now the component is created, but there are a couple of things that we need to do so that this gets executed and rendered. So every time you create a component, you have to register that component, and then you will have to make use of that component in your HTML. So to do that, here we'll be actually creating the root instance for this. So we'll say new Vue, and inside this we will be giving it one element that we'll be defining soon. Let's call it as example. So this is the root instance that we have created for Vue, and this is the example ID. Now this example ID will be actually defined in our index.html page. So here I can go and say div ID as example, and let's close this div now. Now inside this div, I'll be making use of the asynchronous component. So here I'll say, let's copy it from here, async comp, and then I'll close it over here. So 3 things we have done over here. We have created a div element with the ID example, and inside that we are making use of the asynchronous component. Then in our main.js file, we created the async component. We created the root instance for the Vue, and then we are referring the div example using this root instance, which is making use of this asynchronous component. Now let's go ahead and compile this and run. So here you can see that the application is loaded, and this statement that you see, I'll be late for the party, is coming up after a certain delay. So let's launch our debugger tool and refresh it again. So you'll notice that this statement that appears over here, I'll be late for the party, is actually being loaded asynchronously after a given point of time. And here you can even see the console message async, which comes when the resolve method gets executed. So That's how we can create asynchronous components in Vue.js.